Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking what is literally one of the most dramatic, rapid transformations in all of human history. The crazy journey of the United States from an untouched, totally isolated wilderness into the modern global superpower we know today. I mean, think about it. Today, this nation's economy drives global markets, its military has a footprint across the entire planet, and its technology is in the hands of billions of people every single day. But how on earth did we get here? How does a completely unknown continent evolve into the literal center of world's power? Well, that is exactly the story we're going to map out today.
So let's jump right in with a pretty fascinating question. What exactly was happening on this land back during 430 Hijri? That's roughly between the years 1038 and 1040 CE. We're talking way before the giant skyscrapers of New York, long before Washington, D.C. was even a thought, and centuries before the idea of an American flag existed. For the vast majority of the world at that time, this huge landmass was a complete and total mystery. To wrap our heads around this massive, millennium-long journey, we're going to break this explainer down into 5 chronological eras: the untamed continents, colonization and independence, expansion and conflict, the industrial boom, and finally, the global superpower. All right, let's kick things off with era number 1, the untamed continent, diving into the world as it was before 1492. During 430 Hijri, the Old World and the New World couldn't have been more different. Over in the Old World, you had these incredibly interconnected, flourishing Islamic empires spreading across the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. They were constantly sharing knowledge, trade, and culture. But on the flip side of the ocean, the New World was essentially entirely isolated. Europe, Asia, and Africa knew absolutely nothing about it. It was this massive realm of endless forests, huge wild rivers, and untouched mountains, just evolving on a totally independent timeline. But here's the thing, and this is absolutely crucial. This continent was not empty at all. It was actually home to millions of indigenous people who had built some seriously impressive societies. You had the Mississippians constructing these massive earthwork cities near the Great Rivers. Down in the harsh, dry Southwest, the Pueblo peoples were building complex communities right into the cliffs. Up in the freezing far north, the Inuit were thriving. And over in the dense eastern forests, powerful tribal confederacies were managing massive territories. They were farming, developing totally unique cultures, and running trade networks that literally spanned thousands of miles. Now, as a quick footnote, historians do point out that Viking explorers from Scandinavia briefly touched down in North America around the year 1000 CE. But honestly, they didn't really stick around long enough to leave much of a mark. Instead, nature and those intricate native trade networks just kept dominating the continent independently for several more centuries, completely hidden from the rest of the globe.
Well, that intense isolation eventually came to a very abrupt end, pushing us right into era number 2, colonization and independence.
So 1492 hits, and Italian explorer Christopher Columbus inadvertently opens the absolute floodgates. Suddenly, major European powers like Spain, England, France, and Portugal are rushing across the Atlantic. They were looking for gold, massive new tracts of land, lucrative trade routes, and to expand their religions. But we have to look objectively at the horrific cost here. The arrival of Europeans introduced devastating diseases that utterly decimated native populations. It sparked brutal wars and led to the permanent displacement of indigenous communities, basically rewiring the entire continent forever. And man, things escalated quickly from there. By the 1700s, Britain was running 13 highly profitable colonies on the eastern coast. But those heavy taxes and strict political controls started rubbing people the wrong way, sparking massive frustration. In 1775, that frustration boiled over into the American Revolution. Just 1 year later, boom, 1776, leaders like Washington and Jefferson draft the Declaration of Independence. After a few grueling years of war, Britain officially recognized the United States in 1783. So in just a handful of years, this brand new nation violently carved its own space onto the world map. With independence officially locked in, the country entered era number 3, expansion and conflict, and talk about some serious growing pains. If you're going to remember one single year from this period, make it 1803. That is the year of the Louisiana Purchase. With literally a single transaction with France, the young U.S. essentially doubled its entire landmass overnight. This just sent westward expansion into overdrive. Settlers poured across the mountains and plains, expanding cities popped up out of nowhere, and a sprawling web of railroads began stretching out to connect all these distant new lands. But this whole era is a huge paradox.
On one hand, you have this absolutely explosive economic and territorial growth, but at the exact same time, that push west was systematically displacing Native American tribes, tearing apart their communities and forcing them onto reservations. And simultaneously, the booming agricultural economy in parts of the country was leaning heavily on the horrific institution of slavery. It was an incredibly dark reality that was deeply, fundamentally dividing the soul of the nation.
You can probably guess that those massive moral and political tensions couldn't just sit beneath the surface forever. In 1861, they exploded into the American Civil War. It was a completely catastrophic internal conflict that literally tore the country apart. Now, while the war did ultimately lead to the abolition of slavery, the destruction was staggering. It left these incredibly deep, painful physical and societal scars that the country would be navigating for generations. Coming out of the rubble of the Civil War, the nation had to basically reinvent itself, bringing us to Era 4, the industrial boom. This was basically an unstoppable chain reaction of innovation. First, you get these massive factories suddenly pumping out steel, oil, and machinery at a scale the world had never seen. Second, brilliant inventors start totally rewiring daily life. You've got Edison harnessing electricity and Henry Ford revolutionizing how cars are made. And third, you suddenly see literal skyscrapers shooting up into the sky over these rapidly expanding cities. And the fuel for all this? Millions of immigrants arriving from all over the globe looking for opportunity and working to turn America into one of the most dynamic industrial titans on Earth. All of that lightning-fast industrialization perfectly set the stage for our fifth and final era, the global superpower. The two world wars completely flipped the global script. After World War II, a lot of Europe, which had historically been the center of world power, was left in ruins. Their infrastructure was just devastated. But America? Protected by two giant oceans from the physical destruction of the war, the U.S. came out stronger than ever. Its domestic industries went into absolute overdrive to help rebuild the world, and its military expanded its reach globally. The center of gravity for global power had officially crossed the Atlantic. And right after that, we slide directly into the Cold War. That intense geopolitical standoff with the Soviet Union acted like absolute rocket fuel for American innovation. Competing with the Soviets forced the U.S. to pour mind-boggling amounts of resources into things like space exploration, nuclear technology, the invention of modern computers, and structuring the entire global financial system.
All of that fierce, high-stakes scientific rivalry peaked in what is arguably one of the most mind-blowing moments in human history. In 1969, American astronauts landed on the moon. The whole world watched it happen live. And honestly, this wasn't just a science experiment. It was a massive geopolitical flex. It officially cemented America's status as the undeniable, preeminent global superpower. Which brings us right to the present day. I mean, think about it. American influence is baked into almost every single part of modern life. You've got Hollywood shaping what the world watches, Silicon Valley is practically designing the future of technology that we all rely on, top universities are pulling in the smartest minds from every corner of the globe, and backing it all up is a military force that remains one of the most powerful and advanced in recorded history. But look, if we step back and look at the data impartially, running a superpower is incredibly complicated, and it's certainly not without its struggles. Modern America is navigating some super intense internal and external headwinds. We're talking deep political polarization, stark economic inequality, fiercely growing competition from other nations, and constantly evolving social tensions. It's an incredibly delicate balancing act to maintain. So let's zoom all the way out here. Going from a completely unknown, isolated wilderness in 430 Hijri to the literal center of global power today, it is, without a doubt, one of history's wildest rides. But as we know from studying the past, empires rise, civilizations change, and history never ever just hits pause. Which leaves us with one pretty massive question to think about. Looking at everything we just covered, what do you think the next chapter of the American story is going to look like?